Assistant Secretary Pyatt, last month I chaired a subcommittee hearing on the importance of the Black Sea region. Can you talk about how Russia's actions in the Black Sea specifically affect Europe's energy potential and what can happen as the result of the vision that would allow energy from Central Asia to come across through the Black Sea region and supply Southern Europe?
First of all, Senator, thank you for your strong focus on the Black Sea region, because you're exactly right. This is one of the fulcrums of the energy map of Europe today. I think one thing that will be true whenever this war comes to an end, the center of gravity of Europe will shift to the south and the east. So the Black Sea becomes vitally important, and the redrawing of the energy map around the Black Sea that's taking place. Romania's investment and work that Romania is doing with support from my bureau to develop its offshore wind industry in the Black Sea. The new pipeline infrastructure that I have been involved in supporting through multiple jobs, the Southern Gas Corridor, to bring gas from Central Asia to European consumers. The investment that we made to support new pipelines linking Greece to the countries of the Western Balkans to allow them to break their 100% dependency on Gazprom. So what's happening in this Black Sea region is of vital importance. Right now, it's significantly impeded by Russia's occupation of Crimea and the military threat that Russia has presented to the Black Sea. An important aspect of that, which directly impacts American companies, is the pipeline which goes from Kazakhstan to bring crude oil produced by Chevron and ExxonMobil out into the Black Sea, which is vulnerable to the conflict that Russia has brought to the region. So as I look at and in this global responsibility that I have today, I have to think about the geopolitics of our energy interests around the globe. But the region that you focused on in the Black Sea is of absolutely critical importance. And we're fortunate there to have very strong allies. I've been to Bulgaria, Turkey, Romania 3 times in this role, precisely because of how important it is to shaping the energy geopolitics of Europe and the wider region as we look to the future.
Thanks very much. I agree. Senator Murphy.
Thank you very much, Senator Shaheen. Thanks to all 3 of you for being here today and for your great work on behalf of the United States and our interest in supporting a independent and sovereign Ukraine. Listen, I don't understand the games that our Republican friends are playing with Ukraine aid. I think this is an existential moment. We are at the 0 hour with respect to Ukraine's needs. I want to pass comprehensive bipartisan immigration reform as badly as anyone, but to hold Ukraine hostage to unlocking that very difficult knot is dangerous for us and the world. But I'm there in good faith trying to listen to my Republican friends to try to get a path forward here. But this is really one side of the equation, the support that Ukraine needs. And I hope that we find a path in the next 2 weeks to be able to get Ukraine the supplemental assistance it needs. The other side of this equation is what we can do to make it harder for Russia to be able to sustain this level of operation. And so I wanted to ask maybe both you, Ambassador Pyatt and Ambassador O'Brien, about how Russia's long-term prospects look to be able to afford this war and what the United States can do. You know, here's a note. Russia started out spending about 4% of GDP on military endeavors. This budget for the upcoming year will have them spending 6% of GDP on their military. That puts them in the top 5 in the entire world in terms of the percentage of their economy dedicated to military spending. Note that number 1 on that list is Ukraine, that is spending 33% of its GDP, 33% of its GDP on the military. But the IEA projects that Russia's share of globally traded oil is going to fall by 50% by 2030, and that their net income from gas sales is going to fall from $75 billion to $30 billion. You're spending already 6% of your GDP and you have a potential catastrophic fall coming in oil and gas revenue, that is one of the things, maybe the primary factor, that may push Russia to the table to try to drive a conclusion to this conflict. So what can we do as members of Congress, and how can we support your efforts to continue to make it harder for Russia to finance this war? And how much of that is dependent on our allies in India and our adversaries in China making different decisions than they are today? I'll stop there and ask both of you to comment on that quickly.
So quickly, Senator, thank you for the question, and you're exactly right in terms of the structural decline in oil and gas revenue that Russia is confronting. We are working as hard as we can to accelerate that trend. We do that through two mechanisms. One is by accelerating our energy transition, both here in the United States but also globally, as the Biden administration has done through the Inflation Reduction Act, to reduce the dependence on fossil fuels. But the other aspect of this is what we are doing systematically to reduce Russia's future energy revenue. Just last week, for instance, we leveled new sanctions against a project in the Arctic LNG 2, which is Novatek's flagship LNG project, which Novatek set in motion with the aspiration of developing Russia as the largest LNG exporter in the world. Our objective is to kill that project, and we are doing that through our sanctions, working with our partners in the G7 and beyond. I think the other aspect of this, and it goes back to Senator Shaheen's point about the Black Sea, is how we work with the countries that have historically depended on Russian energy and have been paying into the Kremlin's resources. We have done that quite successfully in Europe. We need to keep focusing on the Asian front. We do that through the price cap coalition, and I think it's important also to recognize that the price cap has worked in its dual objectives of reducing the Kremlin's revenues while also keeping Russian crude oil on global markets in order not to destabilize further a global energy market that the Kremlin has profoundly destabilized. But let me invite Jim to add.
I completely agree with what Jeff has just said. I'll try to focus a little more on the future here. Russia's losing its lucrative markets. That's what got it rich enough to afford this war. It's losing out in the sectors of innovation that are going to drive economic development in the future. So we look at this and say, does it put pressure on Putin to get to the table? Well, yes, it does. It's going to take a little time. He started the war with $640 billion in a rainy day fund. By the start of this year, despite record profits last year, he was down around 580. We immobilized 300 of that, and he spent down further from there. So that gives him a year, 2 years maybe of run room on that rainy day fund that all came from selling oil and gas. So that's gone. The second thing is that we don't see Russia able to play in the sectors that are going to drive innovation and economic growth in the future, the areas of quantum mechanics, artificial intelligence, the energy transition, including the new nuclear technologies that are coming on board. And Senator Risch, your work on this I really appreciate, because Russia entangles countries in these long-term networks of corruption with generation-long Rosatom contracts. We're now competing for those again and taking those sectors away from Russia. That changes the long-term prospect from what it was. The result of all this is we anticipate that Russia's GDP is going to be at least 20% smaller by 2030 than it would be if Putin had not started this war. So it's a long-term strategic loss for him, and it creates a great opportunity for us in a number of important sectors.
Thank you. Thank you.
Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you for your service and your testimony. And I just want to underscore what the chairman and others have said, which all of you know. This is a moment of truth for the Congress and for the United States in terms of the urgent need to continue to support our Ukrainian friends. They are losing lives and giving blood. The least we can do is provide military assistance. And as all of you indicated, it's important in itself to protect sovereignty and democracy in Ukraine, but this is also a much broader challenge. if we don't go forward with the continued assistance, it will undermine the NATO alliance and other European partners. And we all know other autocrats around the world, like President Xi, are watching very closely as he keeps one eye on Taiwan. And it would send a terrible message to our allies in the Indo-Pacific, Japan, Republic of Korea, and everybody else. So this is really a critical moment for the Congress. And I want to thank all of you and the President for his leadership on this. Ambassador Pyatt, thank you for your service in Greece. And as you well know, you worked on this. One of the key facilities that was built to help supply U.S.-based LNG to Ukraine and others in the region was at the port of Alexandroupolis. So thank you for that effort. I do want to pick up on some of Senator Murphy's points with respect to the oil price cap. I'm a big supporter of it. I think it was an innovative approach by the President and our allies to put this price cap on Russian oil. And the impact, as you said, has been to reduce Russian oil revenues. And of course, oil revenues are the primary source of revenue for Russia and its war machine. But I do want to talk about further implementation and enforcement of the price cap. Reuters reported that Russian oil and gas revenues more than doubled in October, just last month, compared to September. So a doubling in revenues. And the reports indicate that Russia's using a shadow and gray fleet to help avoid sanctions. And it also raises the question of the extent to which we, the United States and our partners, are really enforcing the price oil cap if revenues doubled in 1 month. Could you speak to that, please?
Yeah. Thanks, Senator. And I think your question and the data you put on the table illustrates the challenge that markets will try to find a way around these things. So the work that we do with the Office of the Sanctions Coordinator at the State Department, working closely with OFAC, to keep turning the screws is absolutely critical importance. That's why we recently delivered sanctions against 2 shipping companies who were found to be operating outside of the price cap, notwithstanding the attestations. That's why both the Treasury and the State Department have been intensively engaged with shipping operators and with insurance providers to encourage high standards of scrutiny of the attestations that are part of this process. I think I would also highlight the importance of the dialogues that I've had personally with key ship owners in shipping countries in order to highlight our resolve to continue putting a very bright spotlight on activities which are brushing up against the edge of the price cap. Fortunately, the vast majority of the global shipping fleet, these are publicly traded companies, oftentimes with headquarters that are housed in London or New York. So they are extremely sensitive to the kind of scrutiny that the U.S. and our price cap coalition allies can provide. But we do need to keep an eye on this shadow fleet, the growth of the shadow fleet, and the reality that what was up until last year a fairly homogenized global crude oil market has now been bifurcated into 2 channels.
Thank you. If I could, because I see my time's running out, thank you. Thank you. We got to keep the pressure on. And my last question relates to the reconstruction effort. We had Scott Nathan, the head of DFC, before this committee not that long ago. As you know, we took OPEC and tried to beef it up into the DFC. But one of the things that apparently was left behind is OPEC allowed for much more easily available political risk insurance, the way OMB scores it, than DFC. That was not the intention. The intention was for that to be more robust. Are you aware of this issue? And can we fix it so that when it comes to getting more investment in Ukraine under politically and other risky circumstances, we have all the tools available?
Thank you, Senator, for your question. And yes, I am aware. And I do know that DFC carries political risk insurance, which embedded in which is war risk insurance, identified as one of the constraints to mobilizing new investors. In addition, we are working very closely to ensure that there's access to finance and capital and other key drivers of growth for those companies that never left Ukraine, including American companies in the agriculture sector, the IT sector in particular, as well as energy and other key areas of opportunity. And I know that Secretary Pritzker is working closely with Scott to make sure that we do all we can collectively to help buy down some of that risk and make those tools available so that we can stimulate the economic growth necessary.
I just understand that the way OMB is scoring this right now is handicapping those efforts. And so I look forward to following up with all of you on that question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Rubio.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming in. It's my personal belief, and I've tried to make this argument, that the three challenges of what's happening in the South China Sea and the Taiwan Straits, what's happening with Iran's desire to build an Islamist regional order centered on Tehran, and what's happening and what Putin has done in Ukraine, that those three things in combination, any one of the three holds the real risk of escalation and spiraling into something worse. But the combination of the three really are an inflection point that will determine, in my view, much of what the rest of the century is going to look like. It's in that context, I think, we have to analyze what's happening in Ukraine. I want to be frank with you about our problem. Our problem is, I'm not sure that that argument from a growing number of people, let me just be colloquial about it and tell you what I hear. People come up to me and say the following: we have 5,000 to 6,000 people a day crossing our border. We've got all these other needs. We're running up this enormous debt. Now, obviously, we got to help Israel. We still have to build up our military because the real risk is China. Why is Ukraine important in that context? I hear that constantly. And I hear that from people that a year and a half ago, wanted to do more. I hear that from people, that are not necessarily fans of Vladimir Putin. I think it's unfair to say that people that have questions about the effort in Ukraine are somehow pro-Putin. I also think, one of the dangers we face in these three challenges that I think are definitional for the rest of the 100 years, or the rest of the century, is the trade-offs that are going to have to happen. We're going to have to make policy decisions because one of the risks we run is being overextended. Now, I understand, and this is not critical, I understand, I agree with all the things about, we can't allow borders to be changed unilaterally, and we have to stand with our allies. I'm not diminishing any of those things. But these arguments, those arguments are too vague. They make sense here, but I'm just telling you they're too vague. And I think that they're also, this notion of we need to do whatever it takes for however long it takes is also misguided. Not because that's not necessarily what we need to do, but because that's not going to be enough for people that are asking these questions. So I would just say, if you had an opportunity, any of you three or all you three, to talk to someone that came up to me a week ago and said, why are we still putting all this money in Ukraine? I hate Putin. I hate what he's done. But we've got all these other things domestically and in other parts of the world that are more important, including China and now what's happening in the Middle East. How are we going to be spending $60 billion every 6 months? For how long, given the debt that we already have? What would you say to them, and how would you explain to them that this fits into our national interest in that perspective I've just outlined?
That's really well framed, Senator. So I'll do my best here. I think the first thing I'd say is you got to shore up your own base. If we're going to confront the China over the next decades, it's 1.4 billion people that's looking to write the rules that the world economy will run on. We go at them with a coalition of 50-odd countries. Europe is about 600 to 700 million of that. We're 350 million. With that, already, we're set to compete really effectively. Ukraine, though, is a challenge by Putin trying to fray that foundation. So we have to shore that up if we're going to have the heft to compete with China over time. The battle over Ukraine also allows us to reinvigorate our own industrial base. We're creating new energy technologies and putting them in place around the world. We're building new defense technologies, the work that's being done in IT. All of that's included in this supplemental, and that's going to make us better able to defend Taiwan, to work in the South China Sea than we have otherwise. The final point I'd make is this is the wrong time to walk away because Ukraine's winning. It's already taken back half the territory Putin seized since February 22. It's opened up the Black Sea grain lanes that Putin tried to shut down in July. Did that mostly with its own creativity around a whole set of interesting drones and other technologies that are going to contribute to our security as Ukraine gets closer to NATO. So those are all reasons you don't walk away when you're partway through the job.
I would just add and thank you for the question. It was well framed. My dad asked me the same question. Why are we supporting Ukraine? And the answer that I gave him was that if we don't, American leadership has unlocked the alliances and the mobilization of all of the support that we've seen. Number one, we're not alone. We are in this together. And number two, if we falter in our support, Russia will win. And they won't stop at Ukraine. And we have been able to support through economic assistance, humanitarian assistance, and security assistance without having our own soldiers on the ground. And we want to do everything we can to prevent that from happening.